Happy International Women's Day. Today is always a very special day for me. Well, besides the obvious that I'm female. It's very special, especially this year, because I think a lot of us Iranians have come to realize something that we always well, for me personally, try to push to the back of our mind because it's not a very pleasant topic to think about. And you're not in Iran anymore, so why would you think about all the problems back home, right? But I think this year, a lot of us had to face the issue. So that's why I wanted to dedicate this episode to the women of Iran. Personally, I left Iran when I was 13 years old. So I did face some of the discriminations because, I mean, even if you're a 5-year-old girl, you face it in some shape or form, but not really as an adult. So fortunately or unfortunately, I escaped that part of my adult life. But when I see it in the news, the Iranian women, what they go through and the bravery to stand against the government people, I don't know if personally, if I was living in Iran, I would like to think I would do the same, but I really don't know if I would. So it's a very admirable and it's kind of made me realize that it's something that we should talk about, even if we are not in Iran, even if there is no protest going on, because personally, I feel a little bit responsible as an Iranian person to raise awareness of what's happening back home. And it helps us personally as well, not just the Iranian people in Iran. I feel like personally, as an Iranian immigrant, when people know about your background, where you come from or what you're going through, they have a greater level of appreciation for you, who you are as an individual. So I'm really passionate about today's podcast, and we have an amazing panelists today from all over the world, different backgrounds, from academics to entrepreneur writers and engineers. But I think one thing we all have in common is that we're all Iranian. So that's something we can really both be proud of, and also we understand each other more, because as a non-Iranian, you can read the news, you can educate yourself, but if you haven't personally gone through that, you might not really be able to feel exactly how it feels, or what people are going through back home. But yeah, I'll pass over to Payal, who has kindly agreed to co-host this episode with me. She's not Iranian, so if you want to say something she doesn't understand, we can speak Farsi. That's fine. But yeah, Payal, we're good for you to do a little introduction for our guest here who doesn't know you, and then we can do the guest introductions.
Hi everyone, it's absolutely lovely to meet you. I'm Payal. I'm based in the UK and I'm not Iranian, as Zara said. I'm Indian. I was born in India. I grew up in Spain, lived in the UK and lived in Malaysia. So I've got a little bit more of an international perspective on being a woman in different countries. And I think I've seen the changes as time has gone on. And I met Zara in Malaysia, where I learned a lot about Iran. Even my parents have told me a lot about Iran because they knew it before the revolution. So I'm very, very excited for this conversation because I want to learn more from you. And I also want you to let me know, how is it different to where you're currently living, and how international, and what International Women's Day is for you. So I'm very excited for this.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, like, never think that's a silly question to ask, because what I've realized, a lot of non-Iranian people are scared to ask questions because they don't want to offend us. So anything doesn't make sense, just ask. There's no such thing as a silly question. And that's why I wanted you here, because I want non-Iranian people to understand what's going on. So if you think there is something we are talking about that someone who's not Iranian wouldn't understand, just jump in. But yeah, we can go to Shahrzad. Would love to hear about who Shahrzad is. That's a big question. Well, you don't need to go into the philosophical stuff unless you want to.
Perfect. Thank you. Firstly, thanks for having me on this show. It's really a great opportunity to, share some feelings that I've been feeling about the past 5 months as well, as well as the Women's Day. So yeah, I'm Shahrzad. I'm an engineer, a biomedical engineer. I spent most of my life so far in Iran. So I left Iran when I was 24 years old. I finished my education. I graduated from my bachelor's in biomedical engineering, and then left Iran and came to the UK to do my master's again in medical engineering. And so yeah, I've been living here for less than a decade, and there are massive differences in terms of experience of life as a human being first, and then as a woman in a Western society, in a modern society. I can't wait to, properly jump into this discussion and just talk through the differences and challenges maybe for us immigrants. And yeah.
Excellent. That's really good to have you, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I'm really curious to talk to someone who's actually been to university in Iran. I'm sure you have some good stories to tell. And I used to be envious of people who went to uni at Iran, because my university experience here was really fun, and I always used to think, imagine if I was in Iran, it would be 10 times better. Until I saw what people were going through during the protest, and I thought, no. Anyway, Golnaz, would love to go to you next. Yeah, would love to hear about your background, and pass over the mic to you.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. This is such a great panel. Thank you, Roxana, Payal, for doing this. So I'm Golnaz. My background is in political science and journalism. I'm a writer. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm currently working in my second startup. But I think that's something that we can discuss later. But I want to focus on what International Women's Day means to me. And of course, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my background. So I left Iran when I was 8, but I've been back and forth a lot. So I actually did a couple of years of school in Iran. I went back home to do my bachelor's degree because I really wanted to serve. That's why I did political science. I don't know what I was thinking. Youth. When you're a teenager, you think you can change the world. I came back to Canada to do my master's in journalism. So Roxana, I had that sort of both university experiences in Iran and outside of Iran. So I was really fortunate in that sense. Yes. I mean, this is back in 2005, 2006. So and I was actually at the university when 2009 protests happened. So I had that experience as well. I had so many different experiences. Just like Shahrzad said, there's so many differences between what women's rights looks like in Canada and in Iran. And I think I could never do a fair comparison because in Iran, we're still fighting for our most basic rights, right? But we'll get into that, I think, later on. So yeah. Thank you so much.
Wow, sounds like you had a best of the both worlds in a way, which is amazing. Excellent. And last but not least, Amir, it's good to have you really on panel. And I always think every time you talk about women's rights, you should always have a male, because 50% of the population is male. And I actually wanted to have more males, but didn't get the chance to have. So but yeah, really happy to have you. And I want you to ask male questions. Really, what do you guys think about feminism? Because I know a lot of males are threatened or not. Well, I don't know. I don't want to put any words in your mouth. Anyway, let's go to you, Amir.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Amir Sheikhi, and I'm an assistant professor of chemical engineering and by courtesy in biomedical engineering at Penn State University. And I have two things in common. One with Shahrzad and one with Golnaz. So when I was 24, I left the country. So that is what I have in common with Shahrzad. I did my undergrad and master's in chemical engineering at the University of Tehran. When I was 24, I left the country to do a PhD in chemical engineering at McGill University in Montreal. So I'm also partially Canadian. So I lived there in Montreal for about 6 years. I did a PhD there for 4 years, followed by 2 years of postdoc in chemistry. And then I drove south to Boston to do a postdoc at Harvard Medical School and then UCLA. And right after that, I joined Penn State as a faculty member. So what I have in common with Golnaz is that I did my undergrad and master's at the same university as where she studied, University of Tehran, I believe. You studied there as well, Golnaz. So what I would like to say first is that what I'm going to talk about today is solely my opinion. They don't have any association with the university that I am at or any professional, basically, societies that I'm a member of. And second, I'm absolutely not a politics person. I'm a scientist and entrepreneurial person. So what I'm going to tell you is my side of the story as a human being, basically, right? So you asked about what I think about feminism, right? I think so. The way I think about it is, to me, we should have something called humanitism, right? Which means that male and female are exactly equal. Right? This is what I believe. So as soon as we start putting labels on these two things, we make them different, right? We have to put labels now because of all the differences and all the discriminations and all the challenges faced by the minority, right? And it is a general argument that I would like to have here. And minorities are like females, people of color, and so forth, right? So I would like to take a step back and say that if we are truly equal, then we do not even need to discuss this. But unfortunately, today's society is not all equal. That's why we have all these discussions.
Yeah, no, I sort of agree, but we can unpack that shortly. That actually goes quite aligns with the theme of International Women's Day this year, is equity as opposed to equality. Payal actually explained the difference to me earlier very well. So I'm going to ask you to explain it again, because I mean, if I was confused, I'm sure there are people who are confused on it as well. So what's the difference between equity and equality, and why is International Women's Day this year is about equity rather than equality?
That's a great question. And I think equality is one of those things where if we were truly equal, we'd all have to start at an equal place, right? So for example, I used this analogy with Zara earlier. You have three different types of people: someone who's very wealthy, someone who has a medium amount of wealth, and someone who doesn't have a lot of wealth. And if you were a true believer of equality, you would give them all the same amount of money. If you gave them, say, $100,000, it would change the poor person's life. It would be of some importance to the person who's medium wealthy, but it would make no difference to anyone who's very wealthy. For them, it would just be a drop in the bucket. So that in a way is equality. But equity is seeing what someone already has at the beginning. So as Amir was saying, men have a lot more rights than women do in lots of parts of the world, right? If you were then to give women more rights that men don't have, that in a way is equity, because you're giving, men already have those rights, so you're giving women those rights, and then you're bringing them up to the same level. So again, in the analogy of the three people, if you're giving the very, very rich person $1,000, you're giving the medium rich person $100,000, and you're giving the very poor person, say,
100,000.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
$1 million, and then you're trying to bring them all to the same level. You're giving them different things, but you're trying to bring them all to the same level, and that is how I interpret equity.
Yeah.
And I think in the world, what we need, as well as to reach equality, you need equity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And let's get into Iran now. I think a lot of this conversation came to a surface. I'm sure most people know this now, but Mahsa Jina Amini, when she was detained by the police during her visit to Tehran from Saqqez, which is a province of Kurdistan in Iran, she was detained by the police because she had improper hijab. And a few days later, she passed away, unfortunately. And then later on, it came out that there was she was beaten up and there was injury to her head. Essentially, she was killed by the police, and that kicked off a huge riot in Iran. When this happened, a comment that I was hearing a lot from non-Iranians is, wow, all of this just for one girl. Why? What's so special about this? I mean, some people were appalled, and or they were pretending to be appalled because it's not, even for one girl, it's not good to go to die in such a horrific way. But at the back of their mind, a lot of people were thinking, why now? Why just one girl? What's going on? A lot of what I witnessed was a lot of surprises. I don't know about you guys. Like, did you feel like people around you, like especially non-Iranians, were they surprised, and were they also asking you, why now? Why just one girl?
I personally didn't come across any comments like that. I don't know, maybe, I don't know if it's because of the people around me. But you know, in my understanding from the Western societies is that even one life is precious, unlike what we have in the Middle East back home, that they execute 3 people just to, I don't know, numb the society so that nobody actually speaks up. So that being the case, I think that everybody actually understood why people were so outraged with the death of just Mahsa Amini, like that brutal, unfair way of killing her. So I'm not too sure if I can comment on that at this point.
Yeah, fair enough. And why do you think now, like why did it make such a big noise now? Like, there's been so many protests in Iran. This is definitely not the first one, but definitely this is one of the first ones where presidents of different countries are commenting on it, and you know, Iranian songs are winning Grammy awards. So what do you think is different about this one that's causing almost like a ripple in the ocean?
Like you said very correctly, we've been having uprising and movements every 10 years or so in Iran. So, and each time it's bigger and involves more people. So I don't think it's exactly fair to say that this is like huge compared to everything that's happened in the past. So yeah, I think people in Iran are under a lot of pressure, and you know, it's as if something is brewing, something is being prepared to like explode. And that's, I mean, Mahsa being killed that way may have been that little bit of more energy that people needed to actually form this movement. So yeah, it's not that we didn't have any uprisings before, but this one has been definitely certainly bigger.
Yeah, I agree. Does anyone else has any?
Sure. Sorry, I thought we were going from Shahrzad, me, and then Amir. It's just that's programmed in my head now.
No,
programmed in my
feel
head.
free.
Like,
feel free to jump in. This
sure.
interrupts, just like we do when we have politic debates at home with family.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, circling back to your first question, I mean, I've never, no one has asked me from my non-Iranian friends why now. I mean, they do ask why now, but their question doesn't involve about Mahsa herself. But I do receive a question, and this is not a question; it's more of a statement, which is really unfortunate. That if the hijab is a law, like people they should just obey it, right? Which is really, really unfortunate, because I think the most important thing to remember about Jina Amini is that she was wearing the hijab. That's the thing. And I think that's why this set of protests included so many people, because she could have been anyone. She could have been anyone's daughter, sister, wife. I think her youth, her innocence sort of spoke out to a lot of people, even a lot of people who are religious, who identify themselves as religious, right?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I've never received a question like that. I have received really heartbreaking questions. I'm not going to get into that. But to answer your second question, I think, I mean, we've had uprisings, of course. I mean, we had the 2009 process, and then the 2017, 2019. And I think since 2017, everything started happening faster. Whereas before, every 10 years, like what Shahrzad said, we would have seen protests. in universities, and then 2009 protests, post-presidential elections, and then it became more of an economic problems. And I think since 2017 is including more and more groups of people and classes. And I think this time is just, it just blew up because the economy is crashing, and it has been crashing for the past 9 years severely. Discrimination is at its, like, it's at a point where people are just so fed up. But I think the third point I want to make is that this is the first time that we see the diaspora is speaking out as well. I mean, I was in Iran in 2009. I remember my friends that take some stands outside of Iran. But 2017, 2019, and then when the Ukrainian flight was down, people did speak up, but we've never seen anything to this measure, right? So I think all of these factors plays into that as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit like putting something under pressure, and also it was 2022. Like, imagine in this era, and millennials can't handle such pressure, so Gen Z is just the next level. And I think what shocked a lot of people is that they always thought of Iran as Middle East, so therefore naturally Middle East is conservative. But that's a very inaccurate understanding of our culture and background, and where we were and where we come from. And it kind of gave rise to this movement. So I know a lot of you guys were had experience living in Iran as an adult. Unfortunately, I never went back to Iran since I left. It's been a long time, and that's the reason. I mean, to be honest, I was scared forever to go back. But I'm curious to learn from you guys as adults who lived in Iran. I always think there is two types of feminism. There is the feminism for the Middle East, and there is the feminism for the West, and they're different. Because the feminism for the Middle East is just writing for basic human rights, and the feminism in the West is the next level from that. So when we think of feminism in the concept of Iran and Middle East, and for you guys as females, and also for you as Amir as a male, because I think a lot of what they try to drill into our head, that that's what Iranian people want. If that's what male want, you know, if you don't want your sister to look like this, you don't want your wife to look like this, blah blah blah, and that, so they make it look like it's our culture. So I want you to comment as a male, like, is this what you want for your sister, for your mother, for your daughter? Do you want them to have a government to dictate to them what they should and they shouldn't do? Or anyone, so maybe, just not even a government, just someone.
Yeah. Maybe I can chime in here. So I think, first of all, we should be a little bit careful if we want to label the whole movement as a feminism movement. Again, I'm absolutely not a knowledgeable person about the definition of feminism, so I cannot comment on that. But at the same time, I would like
just
to be
to interrupt you on that 1 sec. For the sake of this discussion, I have a definition for feminism. Maybe outside or for yourself, you want to have a different level. But for the sake of our discussion, when I personally talk about feminism, I mean, I'm not going to say equality anymore because we've just been corrected. Equity is the right one. Equity, economic, social, and political equity between male and female. So when we say feminism, it means the equity between male and female, and it doesn't mean male and female are the same, but they should be treated the same, given the same opportunities, and have the same equity. So sorry to interrupt you.
So yeah, I'm 100% okay with that, but I'm going to call it equity because, again, in my vocabulary, equity has a very precise definition, which is very aligned to what you said. Feminism, I think there are many definitions for that. But in terms of equity, yeah, I agree. So there should be equity, right? So, and I'm a professor, so I'm going to bring some chemical engineering concepts to the table, right? So if you put molecules in an enclosed space and increase the pressure, right, their temperature increases, right? So that is the first law that we learn in school. It's a similar thing in a society, right? So you put pressure on people, the temperature increases, they'll be ready to explode, right? And what we are seeing now is definitely what is happening. So now women's rights definitely are an issue in Iran for a variety of reasons, in my opinion. And this includes cultural and legal factors, right? So one of the main reasons is the strict interpretation, right, and implementation of laws and traditions in Iran, right, which often results in practices against people, especially women, right? For example, the Iranian government imposes dress code on women that requires them to wear a headscarf and cover their body in public, right? So, and if women do not comply with this dress code, they will face fines, imprisonment, and other physical punishments, right? So that is a source of lack of equity, right? So another factor is the legal system, right? Which may have things against the women. For example, women are not treated equally in diverse inheritance and custody cases, right? So I think these are all examples that need to be addressed to truly meet equity in Iran, and of course in any society, right? Other societies are also suffering from this.
Yeah, I agree. I think me and Payalo are really loving these chemical engineering references because we also have chemical engineering background. But we're not going to make this a science class. Go on, Payalo, did you want to say something?
Yes, just going back to your question about non-Iranians and how they reacted to it. I think normally it would be on the news, we'd watch it on telly, and we'd get a very one-directional or one-dimensional viewpoint from the news about what was happening with the protests in Iran. Because I remember 2009 and 2017 very vaguely, those protests that you talk about. I remember seeing it on the news. But what we've seen now is September of 2022. I remember seeing post after post on social media, and they were from the perspective of Iranian women. And that was so different and so refreshing because I'd never seen that perspective directly. It had always been through a very posh British voice on the telly saying protests in Iran are underway again. So seeing that first person point of view from people in Iran, and the videos that they showed, some of them were very graphic, but that has propelled the movement. How do you think social media, this is an open question to everyone, how do you think social media has it either helped the protest? Has it hindered it? Has it helped the government identify people? Because I heard that was a thing as well. So what has been the role of social media in these protests, and how do you think it's going to be in the future?
Yeah. Anyone want?
Can I start? Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Shahrzad. No. It's programmed in my head. You have to talk first now.
This is the Iranian, what we have called Tarof. So
Yeah.
basically, it's worse than what the British have. So you need to keep saying, no, you go first, no, you go first, and you go first. Anyway, sorry. Go on, Shahrzad.
Okay, so yeah, definitely. I think the way that the news was shared on social media using hashtags and everything, and because everybody is now active at least on one of the different social media applications like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, and people were sharing this information real time. That was a really positive thing. At the same time, I could read in comments and things that people in Iran were not exactly happy that because of this having the ability to type on social media and express their feelings on social media, it's as if they were doing that only and not actually helping the protests go any further, like not physically going outside their homes and do something, and they just would sit behind their computer and post posts. There's that aspect to it as well. However, I totally agree that social media did help raise awareness, and this footage that came out really opened everyone's eyes at what's going on in Iran.
So back in 2009, I remember Twitter was fairly young, but I remember people started getting organized on Twitter to call each other where the next protest is going to be. I didn't have Twitter myself back then. It was such a vague and foreign concept to me. I was really against social media up until I think 2011, 2012. Facebook was very popular, but I remember people really use Twitter as a platform to call their peers. This is where the next protest is going to happen, and this is what we're going to do, right? And I remember Twitter at some point was going through some maintenance, and President Obama actually asked them not to shut down the site, the platform, because people were getting organized on it. So, and I think social media has played a huge role since then for Iranians. Of course, I agree with what Shahrzad said. There is also some downsides to whatever platforms, whatever technology you use. And one of those, it's all the misinformation that we see on social media as well. I mean, there's that concept where people can find the other people who think alike, they can get organized, they can get the information that they need, especially when the internet was shut off. We saw that in 2017, 2019, and even in 2022, right? People still could get information from the inside, but there's also tons of misinformation that people in Iran and outside have to fight against, right? So I think that's the downside to it. But personally, I think having it is much better than not having it. Because if we want to compare all the protests that has happened for the past 44 years, while we had the social media, and how Gen Z is using it now to get the word out there, is helping the movement much more.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if it wasn't for social media, we probably wouldn't have heard about the Mahsa Amini news, right? Because the press in Iran is basically run by the government. They filter every news that comes out. They can pull out the news. It basically goes through multiple layers before it gets to the public. So the reason why the youth in Iran today are so open-minded and they know what they want and they go outside and they call it out is because of social media. And that, I think that's the biggest fear for the Iranian government, social media. And that's why they're coming up with new strategies to give different levels of access to different people in the society now. So one family could have access to Facebook, and then the next family don't. It's gonna be very crazy, and I think we're moving towards North Korea, unfortunately. Yeah. I think now I would really like to learn about your personal experiences. It doesn't have to be in Iran, but as a male, as a female, when was the first time that you noticed there is lack of equity or equality, or however you want to think about it? You're, as a female, or even like as from a male perspective, you noticed that females are being treated differently. For me, I mean, I can go first to give you guys some time to think about it. The first time I noticed it was actually here. I mean, because I left Iran at a young age. And even if I noticed it, I think at that time I wouldn't have realized, because my brain was programmed that way. But when I moved here and I wanted to study chemical engineering, everyone was telling me, "Oh, isn't that engineering for guys, isn't it? Why don't you do something like nursing?" Like I heard it quite a few times, even from teachers or people from my school. And that's England. Imagine Iran. Actually, in Iran, engineering is quite good between girls, because a lot of families push for their children to go into engineering, law, or medicine. So from that perspective, I think we have equity, which is good. But yeah, I would love to hear if anyone, when was the first time that you noticed that you're being treated differently as a female?
Well, I'll start again. So yeah, as a teenager, I guess, or even before that, at the age of 9, when they gather you at school and bring some stuff to celebrate that you are now a woman, and that's Jashn Taklif. Like that's the proper celebration for Muslim 9-year-old girls who are now women. I need to cover up. That's, I guess, the first point. There's something different now. You're obligated to wear hijab, even though family doesn't insist on it. When you even after that celebration, when you go out with your family, you're still not covering up. But I guess that's the first point I can remember. And then as a teenager, when I was walking on the street with my family, and at that point, like, I don't know, 15 years old, I would cover up. I would wear a headscarf. And then there are these ladies who walk around and come and tell you that you're not wearing things properly, like almost what happened to Mahsa. Like the initial contact is when they come to you personally and say, okay, dear, you're not covering up properly. Headscarf, bring it forward. And I had my sleeves up as well. So, you know, you're not doing it properly. You need to cover up properly. And yeah, that's when it's very humiliating, and it's very, what is happening? I'm just walking with my family. That's none of your business how it look.
It's so crazy to think about it now. A 9-year-old child is being told you're now a woman. That's so crazy. And you could potentially even be married. If your parents give permission, you can get married today. And maybe thousands of years ago, in the age of Prophet Muhammad, that could have been acceptable. But today, to think that in 2023, a 9-year-old girl could get married, imagine, that's child abuse in a legal way. That's the most crazy thing that I've ever. And actually, I said I didn't have anything in Iran, but now you said that, I remembered actually in Iran, even as a, I think, 10 or 11-year-old, I was abused by my head teacher in school. I was just walking in a girls' school. In Iran, boys and girls' schools are separate. So everyone in the school is female. There's nothing haram happening. Why can't you leave me alone now? And I remember my head teacher, she didn't even say dear, or she didn't even talk to me. She just pulled my maghna, which is like a headscarf that covers even your neck. She just pulled it forward in the most like harsh way possible. I was so shocked, like, what was that and where did that come from? Because I was just walking and I noticed the hand pulling my headscarf so harshly forward, and she smacked me in the back of the head as well. She's like, next time I don't want to see your head at the front. And that was the first time. It's like they own your body.
And this causes trauma, and it causes mental health issues. And as a woman moving to the UK, I had serious, and still do, self-esteem issues that I need to work on and undo whatever they did to me back in Iran. It takes a lot of hard work.
Amir, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go next. That's how the program works. So I think actually the first time that I thought something is not right, it's when I was in grade 2, and this is back when I was in Iran. And at school, they gave gifts to all the little girls who were called Fatima or Zahra. And that's actually what they did every year. So at the birthday of Fatima, who was the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, she had 2 names, Fatima and Zahra. Whoever was called Fatima or Zahra, they would give them gifts. And actually, as a little child, I never understood like why your adults would do that. Because I remember the first time it happened, I went home crying to my mom. Why didn't you call me Zahra or Fatima? Like I didn't receive this gift. I can't remember what it was, right? But that's the first experience I have when it comes to discrimination. I didn't understand it back then why I was discriminated against. I didn't understand that it was religious-based or gender-based. It really didn't matter. It just mattered that I didn't receive that gift, right? But I think as a woman of color who's faced discrimination in my home country, the second memory that I have is here in Canada, and this is in grade 6, where my teacher, they were showing us, this is when VCR was in. I don't remember I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember VCR, but they were showing us something in the TV, and the teacher turned and asked me if I've ever seen a video. My English was so poor back then. I remember how the rage that I felt, the humiliation. And I stood up. I was like really tiny. I'm still am, but I was really tiny. But I stood up and I was like, with very poor English, I said, "Well, we have satellite." Sorry, something happened in my house. I just heard a very
No,
loud scream. Yes, 1 second, please.
go for it. Maybe you can, Amir, you can jump in
Yeah,
here if you
sure.
have
So
anything to add.
yeah, definitely my experience is different because as a teenager,
I mean, as an Iranian immigrant, you could, if you have experienced
yeah,
discrimination in the US, you can also show that. But I mean, if you've seen any girls as well.
yeah, sure. So, but let me go back to your question. Of course, one of the first times that I noticed the difference was again when I was pretty young and watching movies, right? So watching movies and seeing how male and female are, they look more equal, right? Than by movies, I mean like Hollywood movies or foreign movies, right? Compared to what was happening in Iran. So I think that was the first time as a as a 8, 9 year old boy, I noticed the difference. But I let Golnaz continue.
Oh no, sorry. It's been snowing here, and then something just happened outside. The sound was really scary. I mean, you go ahead. I can finish later. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just mentioned when was the first time I noticed the difference between how women in Iran are treated and how they're treated in other countries. Yeah.
So the first time that I faced discrimination here as a woman of color and an immigrant, which is funny because in Canada everyone's an immigrant unless you're indigenous or from a First Nation descent. At some point you were an immigrant, right? But I remember I stood up and I told the teacher that we have satellites, and I think I may have brought something with me the next time I went to school, like to just show them, like as a proof that I've seen videos before. But I think, you know what? When I go back to my memories as a child or as a teenager in Iran, unfortunately, it was so normal to see women in their hijab that it was as if someone had to point it out to me that this is not right. This is not how women in the rest of the world live. That made me traumatized then. I remember when I was little, I actually wanted to wear the hijab because I wanted to be an adult. I wanted to be more like my mom and my sister, who's like 7 years older than me, right? So at that point, it was so normal to me that this is what adult women do, right? This is like once I start wearing the hijab, once I start covering myself, I'm considered an adult, right? It wasn't until later on in life where I learned that this is a huge discrimination against women, and the hijab is actually a symbol of all the oppression that women face, like what Amir said about the legal system or even the culture, the patriarchy that we face, right? And going back to what Shahrzad said, it really traumatizes you. I mean, it stays with you for life. We just push it away. We think that it's something that it happened to us. It happened to 50% of our society, so it's fine. But it actually is not fine because you sort of bring it with you for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah, I agree. I noticed that's something all of us Iranian women carry with us. Like we have this tendency to over-explain ourselves, because in Iran you have to answer to everyone. Like you have to answer to the police, to the teacher. It's like you have to constantly justify why you're a female. Like, I'm sorry I did this because of, and you're not even given the opportunity to explain yourself, right? You just have to be sorry for being a woman. And I remember for a long time I used to wish, like, my dream was to be a boy, because I could do anything I want without being judged, without getting in trouble. And I used to tell my brother, you're so lucky, you can do anything you want. Why don't you use your freedom? And he would look at me like he didn't understand. So I wanted, like, something we said at the beginning, Amir, you said in an ideal world, we shouldn't even need to have feminism, right? But I think that ideal world, even in the West, is very far away, let alone in Iran. But every year we talk about International Women's Day and we celebrate these achievements, great achievements of women, and then it goes for another year. why is it important to talk about these issues? Because everyone knows that the Middle East has issues now. Okay, that's how the West labels us. This is Middle East and this is Islam. Get on with it. So why are we fighting? Because this is our government and this is Islamic Republic of Iran. So you just have to live with it, right? So why are Iranian people outside of Iran and also inside of Iran fighting against it and trying to get their voice heard, if that's how it is and that's the law and that's how it should be? Why do we think we can actually do something about it? And is there any point to all the noise that we're trying to make?
So maybe I can chime in here. If something is the law, doesn't mean that it should be like that, right? So if we wanted to settle for low, right? If the world wanted to settle for low, then we would still have terrible things that happened hundreds of years ago in many countries, right? We would still have slavery. We would still have many other, terrible things for humankind, right? So yeah, of course, we as human beings, right, are freedom-seeking people, right? Everyone. So anything that can bring that to us will be appreciated, and anything that take it away from us would be basically not appreciated, right? So I think that is the whole movement here. That's the whole. And again, it is not just Iran; it's in many other societies, right? So people in the world are fighting for freedom. I think freedom is beautiful. It is what everyone deserves to have.
Yeah, you're so right. I think that's why we're trying to make this a revolution rather than a law change, because we know that the whole system needs to change. Because even if the government turn around and says, okay, from tomorrow hijab is not compulsory anymore, we're sure there's a million other problems that will arise on the side, right? The whole system from the root is corrupt. And from you guys who lived there, I want to hear some more experiences, either individually or if you've seen from your friends or family, of some of those corruptions. And the reason why I say it's a corruption and it's not a religious country is because if it was truly religious, you wouldn't see rape in prison. You wouldn't see sexual assault by government people on women. So it's corrupt. So what have you seen any of these corruptions, either yourself or friends or people that you've met, which has caused this explosion of Iranian people to come out and get angry? And I think it's anger. That's why people can't stay quiet anymore.
I can't think of any examples that I experienced or anyone close to me. I guess I was lucky enough not to experience anything on that level. But all of us, we've heard stories, very horrible stories from other people on, what they go through. So there's nothing I can think of at the moment. So maybe Golnaz, can I pass it over to you?
Okay.
Sure, thank you. So I think going back to the legal system, because like I said, I agree with Amir. I think whatever is legal, it doesn't make it ethical or right, or we would have settled so many years ago, like 200, 300 years ago, when law became the regulation of man, right? But I remember I got married. So I met my husband in Iran, and we got married in Iran, Shia, under the Shia law. And there are so many, I'm just explaining this to Payal. So there are so many rights a woman doesn't have when they marry. So one of them is that you can't ask for divorce. There's you have to go through so many hardships to be eligible for women to ask for a divorce, or else only the man is allowed to ask for a divorce, right? There are so many other things. Like your husband can dictate where you work, where you live, whether or not you can have a passport and leave the country, which was, it became actually a very important conversation a couple of years back, right? And I remember, so we went to Mahsa, I don't know what Mahsa is, like the legal
Like
place.
a registration office. Yeah.
Registration office, yeah. We went to the registration office for my husband to grant me these rights. And the person who was responsible for it asked him 5 times if he really wanted to do that. So I was standing there, like, as an adult woman, and I'm looking at my husband, and he's staring back at me like what is this guy is about, right? And this man, who's nobody to me, he's a total stranger. He's asking my husband 5 times whether or not he's sure or he's being coerced to give me this right. So I think this is one of the memories that is very, like, it's highlighted in my mind. Of course, compared to so many other brutalities that women have faced, it might be nothing, but it starts from all of these little things. Like, they strip away your rights little by little until you're left with nothing, and they can do whatever to you, right? And I think that's the concept of dictatorship. So even from first of all, women's quest for freedom in Iran, it started 116 years ago, since the constitutional revolution, right? And we've had ups and downs, but I think after the Islamic Revolution, everything that women had worked for up until then was gone. And it became harder because it's really hard to take away the freedom of a person who's actually tasted that freedom at some point. And it's really hard to take away the freedom of people who are educated, who are connected to the world, who are seeing the rest of the world, and they want to live like that, right? I was detained in 2009, so I've seen the brutality that it happens in prisons as well, not to the extent that we hear these days. But I think it started since 2009. But it's actually a mixture of, if I may say this here, but I think it's a mixture of what Shia law grants the government and how they interpret it, like how they want to put it into law, right? So I can't really take away that concept for it. But obviously, the government is corrupt to the roots, and once the government is corrupt, they can do whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's thank you, Golnaz, because there were a lot of questions in my mind about what rights do you not have? Because, of course, having grown up mostly in the West, for me, it's just become like, oh, but that's something that every woman should have. Like, for example, divorce rights. Surely, if you don't want to be in the marriage, you should be able to say, I don't want to be in this marriage. I would like a divorce. And it's become so ingrained, I think, growing up in the West, that, oh, it's just a basic human right. And learning from you that it's not a basic human right has been this conversation, learning about that has been horrific to know that that's what it is. And freedom obviously means a very different thing to someone in Iran than it does to someone in the West. And so if you were to, in the women life freedom movement, have a definition for freedom, which rights would you think are the most important? Because there are so many. And I think divorce is one of them. Marriage is another one. Zara was saying you can get married off at the age of 9. Being able to choose who you want to marry at that age, that again is another aspect of freedom. So what else is there that you would say would fall under everything would fall under freedom in a way, but what would you say personally is the most important to you?
So, I mean, and this is such a nice conversation, because when I speak to my non-Iranian friends about the women life freedom movement, as you just mentioned, all of these words means different things to people, right? And that's why I think when we read about this movement, when we read about women's rights in Iran, it's really important to use basic rights, because to someone who's programmed in their head that there are some rights that I'm just given, like I've never asked for it, because obviously someone at some point in history has asked for it and has fought for it, right? Because these rights weren't granted to anyone, not even men, by choice, right? They actually fought for it. There were some people who were fighting for these rights. But I think freedom to me, when it comes to Iran, it's freedom of being who you are, because and I say this because we are focusing on women here, but discrimination against minority groups, gender-based, racial-based, even classism in Iran is huge, right? So I myself, as a Farsi woman who lived in the capital, didn't face the same discriminations as a Baluch woman who lived in the outskirts of Zahedan, for example, right? So I had some privileges that this woman would never have, but at the same time, class has some elements into that as well. It's such a weird set of hierarchy of privileges and rights. But at some point, none of this means nothing when the government is corrupt and is willing to take away your rights to sort of stay in power, right? But freedom to me, at least in Iran, it's the freedom of being able to live and being able to be who you are.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, it might be a loaded question, so you can think about it. But do you have that freedom that you explained just now? Do you have it in Canada?
I do, yes. So I was really fortunate because I never faced discrimination in my family. So I think I was fortunate to marry someone who's a feminist himself, right? And I say I'm fortunate because I think that this is a privilege. It doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen to everyone, right? But growing up, I had the privilege to have my, if I want to like talk about a male role model, right? I had a father who told me that I can be anyone that I wanted to be. So it was me against the society. It wasn't me against my family, because a lot of women have to go against their families to become who they are in Iran as well. But yes, to answer your question in like general way, yes, I had that privilege to be who I wanted to be in Canada.
Wow, I'm so pleased to hear that. I like to pose that question to Amir and Shahrzad as well. Like, what does freedom mean to you, and do you think you have it now?
Shahrzad, want to go first? Yeah, sure. So again, I want to bring some chemical engineering concepts here, right? So when you immigrate, when you go to a new environment and you want to adapt, right? The larger the difference between your new environment and the previous one is, the more difficult it is to adapt. And it is the same case for molecules when you take them from one medium to another one, right? So the driving force, the larger the driving force, right, the higher the energy required to bring that system to equilibrium, right? So now, as an Iranian immigrant abroad, right, one of the most significant challenges is the sense of disconnection and isolation from the cultural and social roots, right? So in general, immigrants often struggle to adjust to new way of life, right? And they may face discrimination for that, right? Language barriers, cultural differences, right? And these cultural differences, when you move from somewhere like Iran to North America, are huge, right? So then, yes, definitely we have all faced all these challenges. I don't have any particular example to mention because there are many, right? But of course, some basic rights are much better right here, right? Still, if I want to talk about how US is, right? So US has come a long way for human rights, especially women's rights, right? In US now, women have the right to vote. They did not have it in 1990s and 1920s, right? They have access to education, employment opportunities, and so forth. But still, there are some significant gaps to be filled. For example, the average salary of a female doing the same job as a male employee is lower, right? So that is a gap. Another issue, for example, here in the US is the lack of representation of women in leadership positions, right? So that is why diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big thing. And as an educator and mentor, I personally try to promote that. My research group is about half female students and researchers from around the world, right? Or many other things, right? In the current society of US, for example, let's say abortion is still a challenge, right? So that
Yeah.
could be considered the right for women, and so forth.
Nice. What about you, for you personally? Do you feel, I know you mentioned as an immigrant, of course, there is a lot of challenges, but do you feel more free in the US, or did you feel more free in Iran?
Well, so my definition of freedom, right, which is very personal. I always gauge it by different factors. So social freedom, right, educational freedom, and I think yes, I think I do have more flexibility here.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. That's very insightful. Shahrzad?
That's very interesting. I just, when you asked the question from Amir about whether he has more freedom in the US or Iran, I just imagined for a second if I was a male and I was asked that question. I don't know. For a second, I thought maybe I would have preferred Iran, because I think with the way that the law is in Iran, it supports males. That's for sure. I think women are really second-class citizens, even if that, in Iran. So that was a very interesting question and answer. So thank you, Amir, for your insight. Regarding freedom, so yes, so like everybody said, in Iran we are fighting for our very basic freedom, like, you know, starting from what we want to wear, where we want to go, without having to answer so many questions from different people. Why did you do this? Why did you go there? If there is a like sexual harassment, why did you put yourself in that position to be attacked? You know, it's the blame is always on us. So that's really something that people are fighting for at the moment in Iran. And me personally, I'm happy where I am, and I think I have the freedom that I wanted to have, that I was looking for. And well, that's a big thank you to the UK society, and you know how welcoming people around me have been as well. Yeah, I think I'm happy where I am in terms of freedom and what I want to achieve.
Yeah, I really resonate. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all immigrants for a reason, right? If we didn't have a problem, we would be happily living in our own countries. What you said, Amir, I'm talking on your behalf now, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But even as a male, even if he has more privileges, like you said, freedom of economics, freedom of social well-being, Iran is not a very healthy country now to prosper in your job, in your education right now. I mean, you could work as hard as you want and get all the qualifications and educations as you want. If you don't go to the Friday prayer, that could be the end of your career. Really. It's as ridiculous and as bad as that. You need to have the right connections with the right people at the right level and practice the religion, and, you know, yeah. So the corruption is not just between male and female. It's like Golnaz said earlier. It's at every level, in every part. It's like a virus that goes to every part of the society and affects every aspect of your life. And that's the reason why the UK has the second largest population of immigrants. The second largest immigrant population in the UK is Iranian people. So people are running away from the country. And I'm sure the government is pretty happy about that. As we draw to the close, unless you have any other comments that you want to add, feel free to do so. If not, my closing question is, what do you think, first, if it's different, what do you think we as Iranian people can do or should do to help with the situation in Iran? I know there's so many mixed thoughts and emotions, especially now, because I mean the process is still going on, but it's not as severe as it was a few months ago. So some people are losing hope. What do you think can we do or should we do as Iranians, and what can non-Iranians do if it's different? anyone who wants to go. And if you have any additional comments that you haven't had the chance to make, feel free to add that as well.
We're not going with the program anymore, Shahrzad. Do you want to go first? So I think, I mean, what Iranians outside, what the diaspora has been doing for the past 5 months, has always been considered raising awareness of what is happening in Iran, right? Because I think secondary to the people who are still inside of Iran, people who are outside, Iranians, are the best people who can actually start a conversation and drive it in a way that really resonates with the demands of the people inside, right? Of course, they always say that movements and revolution, how I would like to look at this movement, it has its ups and downs, and it's not going to be on a very straight line. So going back to what you said about the situation is not as severe as, like, 5 months ago, and so many people are losing hope. I think that's sort of the factor that plays into that, right? Because as how we say it in slang, the streets have been empty, right? And once the streets are empty, people just have it in their minds that this movement is done, right? Whereas we still have so many lives at stake. We have youth in prisons who are just waiting to be prosecuted, and their futures is unknown, right? But I think it's important for us who are outside, who have the privilege to have access to free information, to high-speed internet, right? To have the privilege to speak to people who are foreigners, who are non-Iranians, is to keep the conversation alive, right? I mean, I've had this conversation with my friends. I see people just nagging about how everything on mainstream media is based on what Islamic Republic lobbyists are doing. And this is what I always tell them, is that if you're not okay with something that is happening, it's your responsibility to change it, right? So keeping that conversation going, adding more voices to what the mainstream media is doing is, in my opinion, really important. So I think we have to keep the momentum and show that this movement is not dead, because it's not. As long as we still have people who are attached to this movement in prisons and waiting to be prosecuted, right? The movement is pretty much alive, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. On that note, Golnaz, is there something that non-Iranians can do? Are there petitions that can be signed? Is there like way for non-Iranians to petition to their government to say, you can do something about this, and we, the people, want you to do something about this? Is there anything that we could do to push forward?
So that's actually a really good question, Payal. A couple of days ago, a group of us had a meeting with the Minister of Defense of Canada, and this is the exact same question that they asked: is that what can the government do? What can the society do, right? And I think for non-Iranians, for the society, I'll just say it as the society, right? It's to ask their politicians we don't want money from them, right? We don't want them to do anything. We just want them to do nothing at this point, right? We don't want them to hold conversation and deals with the Islamic Republic. And I think this is very important at this point, is that if you're not willing to help the movement, the least you can do is not help the government as well, right? And this is what I'm trying to sort of get the message out there to my non-Iranian friends, because there are so many different petitions online. I receive petitions from Canada, from US, from Australia, from Europe, and so many of them, you can actually sign them as a non-citizen, but I see people just signing them. People don't care. They're like, this is a petition about the movement, I'm just gonna sign it, right? Unfortunately, I don't think these petitions have the force that they had in September, October, and November, right? We've passed that point. We're at the point where the conversation has to be constant, and the conversation has to go back to politicians at this point. The society has to make their politicians responsible for what is happening. In another part of the world, which will have major effects on the rest of us as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Amir or Shahrzad, whoever wants to battle it out.
Amir, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure. So, let me tackle this from an angle that I can contribute, right? And when we, what can we do for this? I think what really matters is what we really can do about it. I personally don't believe that signing something would be the most effective way of contributing to this. So as a university professor, so what we have done at the university is to help young and bright students to find opportunities abroad, right? So we have removed the deadlines for the applications, for example, for Iranians. We have waived their application fees. We have increased the number of Iranians that we admitted this cycle, right? And I'm part of the admission committee, right? So what I want to say is that if people want to succeed in Iran, right, and they are motivated to do that, they're motivated to study abroad, right, definitely reach out to me, right? I would be more than happy to do what I can do, and I think this is an area that I can help, right? Other areas I'm not sure, because I have my limitations. I'm not there, so I do not go through the suffer that people there are going through. So I as a matter of courtesy to them, I remain silent about things that I cannot do about them.
I think that's a big help, and so do not underestimate it. And I think if we go back to the Shah era, there was a lot of problems, but there was a lot of educated people in Iran, and I think the reason is because a lot of them were getting educated in the West, so they could go to different countries and take best practices with them, and that could be a huge game changer for Iran as well, because when a student come from Iran to America, they don't just learn chemical engineering. They learn everything about what America has to offer, and they're not going to go back to Iran and be happy with what they have in Iran. They will take that mindset with them. So that's a huge impact that you're probably having the most direct impact on them. So thanks for being a part of the movement. Shahrzad.
Yeah, so just one thing that I can think of, and I actively do this, that's posting and resharing what's already on social media, or when I see a piece of information, well, obviously it has to be true and correct information. On Instagram, for example, I would then repost it on LinkedIn. And I do use LinkedIn a lot. I post at least one post a day, hashtag Mahsa Amini, and then I post what I want to post. And if non-Iranians could repost and share that information, because I'm sharing that, but many of my followers and connections on LinkedIn are already Iranians who know what's going on. But it's worth so much if non-Iranians could just comment, like, or reshare that. That then shows that information to their community of non-Iranians, and that does help massively with raising awareness. So I think using social media, if you see a post about Iran, about the movement, don't just scroll past, is my request from non-Iranians. Just do something, click like at least,
Yeah.
I think that would help.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of that, because it's a bit like homeless people, right? You might walk past by a homeless person every day and it becomes normal to you that there is a homeless person sitting there. But if you have a conversation with them, one day you might turn around and say, why are you homeless? Why aren't you doing anything about it? Because you know that person and you're paying attention to that person on a daily basis. And it's the same thing with Iran. If you keep posting, and people in your connections will eventually realize, why isn't anything happening in Iran? And maybe one day they will get that kick to make a change. So I think our job is to stop this from becoming normal, even if it becomes silence in Iran, as we can always use our mics to keep talking about it and not make it silence here. Payal, do you have anything to add before we wrap up?
No, just that I will be following and posting and sharing more stories because it has been very enlightening. The stories I've heard so far have only been from you, Roxana, but
Yeah.
bringing together all the different perspectives and seeing how each of you, even having lived in Iran for some amount of time, living abroad, has had those experiences, those shared experiences, and you're all just as passionate about the women life freedom movement. It's incredible because people from all around the world have come together for this. It's clearly something that needs to have the momentum that it currently has behind it. And I really want to support this in the best way. So I'm going to be doing my best. I'm going to be spreading the word. And I hope that as soon as possible, but in the next decade, we think about this as, remember that time when we had this revolution and we brought basic human rights to everyone who wanted it, to everyone who needed it in Iran. And I really hope that's the case that happens.
Yeah, thank you. March is a very important day for Iranian people, not just because of International Women's Day, but it's also Nowruz, right? I know in Canada you probably don't get much of Nowruz if you said you're snowing there, which is sorry about that, Golnaz.
No, actually, it's so funny because it's going to be snowing for the next couple of days, and then next week it's going to rise to like 16 degrees. So that's
Wow.
Vancouver for you. Yeah, I'm worried about my skin that it's going to be like it's just really weird
Skin
times
shock.
right now. Yeah.
Oh dear. Wow. We thought English weather was can't make up his mind, but it seems like Canada's neighbors. Excellent. Well, yeah, Nowruz is a big deal. I think it's 21st of March it is, isn't it? I remember every time for Nowruz, like us Iranians, we get money. Well, I don't know if you guys still get money. I still do. I'd like to keep the tradition alive. But I remember one time my grandma said, "What do you want for Nowruz?" She actually asked me. So I want to be a boy. Okay, that's not possible. What's the next thing? I said, "Promise me you will speak to my parents so that they'd never force me to get married." And she promised me that. So that's a present I got from Nowruz. I don't need to get married. So well, I hope you guys get whatever. I hope you guys really have a good Nowruz, and if I don't see you, Eid Mubarak. Eid خوبی داشته باشین. Sorry, Payali, don't need to understand this bit. And yeah.
Yeah, it was lovely meeting everyone. Thank you so much, Roxana, Payal. This was really insightful. I learned a lot from Shahrzad and Amir. It's always good to have a male perspective. I think that's really important because women, we know what we're going through. We know what has been done to us historically. Having a male perspective and then having them listen to us, I think it's really important at this point in the movement. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I know it can be a little bit intimidating with sitting in a room with 4 women and talking about feminism and women issues, but I think even if you just listen to us, it means a lot because that means you care. So we really appreciate that, and to you, Golnaz and Shahrzad as well. Really appreciate you guys coming on and taking time from your Sundays. We've got like Amir and Golnaz from the other side of the world is your Sunday morning now, so I bet you would rather be in bed now, but thank you for joining me and really
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a pleasure. It's actually noon here, so we have 3 hours different with West Coast. I'm in East Coast, so it's much better than going. But it was a pleasure to be here today and meet all of you and discuss these very important challenges of the society.
Excellent. Thank you guys. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.